finding the room, but maybe they can just sneak in quietly. But I'm really glad you guys are all here today to join us, so thank you very much.
Okay, well, Hannah did a great job of projecting her voice without the microphone, but it sounds like mine is having the help of the microphone too. I'm Andrew Maris. I also teach art here at the junior college, and I've known Brandon since graduate school back in Tennessee, which is also where I met Hannah. And so for a while, I thought, hey, it'd be great to get some of his work out here, and that's sort of how the impulse for this show began. And he was willing to send some work out, and he brought in Jessica as well and said, hey, let's have us be sort of, show together. And from there, we looked for some other artists to fill the show. And Brandon and Jessica also suggested the title Coded, which is, takes a lot of deciphering. It's sort of a tree with many branches. And we'll hear about a couple of those branches today from the artists. But it's just really an honor that they could come out from Maryland, where they now live, and teach at the University of Maryland. And so here they are, and I'm glad you could all come. Thank you very much for your attention and listening to these really amazing artists give their presentation. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's see. So thanks to the Santa Rosa Junior College faculty and staff for inviting us, Hannah Schoenberg, Andrew Maris, and all the students who also helped install the show. Did a really, really great job. So I want to discuss my most recent research, which is about memorials, transformation, through the mediums of painting, assemblage, and sculpture, okay? These are fairly new works, and the theory behind them is still in the process. So I feel very great to share this information with you guys. Okay, so memorials by definitions is like something, especially a structure established by, to remind us of a person or an event. Most commonly, we experience memorials as public and private monuments, candlelight vigils, memorial services, sometimes on T-shirts, car decals. We get creative with how we memorialize and commemorate things. And I find that very fascinating. So I found this image. This is from a candlelight vigil of a rapper and entrepreneur. Some of you may know, his name is Nipsey Hussle. He was murdered in Crenshaw, which is in Los Angeles, as you know. But I found this image very compelling because of the structure of it, the community involved in commemorating and memorializing a person. And that sort of triggered my work. So I got to thinking as well about the objects that people commemorate with or use as memorials. The objects are charged with energy. You think about losing something and kind of giving that energy back to an object, whether it's a candle, a teddy bear, T-shirts. So they can be viewed as sort of a kind of artifact in a way. And my background history comes from airbrushing. I started airbrushing as a teenager. I worked in malls, festivals, bar mitzvahs, you name it. Like an airbrush artist travels and does, those events. I understood airbrushing in a form that was not shown mostly in high art. This idea of high art, which is museums, galleries, being exposed to a limited view of people when you think about it. But art, as we know it, is meant to be experienced by all people, not just a limited amount of people. So this idea of the airbrush being, elevated to a higher level, this is the base of my work, or the foundation of my work. All right, so this piece is titled Rest in Peace, RIP. It's from 2019. And in this piece are 96 names of victims of homicide and domestic abuse. Oh, sorry. Okay, here we go. This is titled Rest in Peace, 2019. So there's 96 names of victims of homicide and domestic violence in the city of Nashville, which is where I've lived for the past, I would say about 15 years. So some of the names include victims of the tragic Waffle House massacre. And so I intended to give power to these names of these people who were kind of rendered powerless through violence. And by airbrushing their names and giving them power in a public space, such as museums and galleries, now it's a part of a high art conversation. Also, thinking about like how they're decorated, when you understand like airbrushing, it's very colorful, very bright, sort of like a celebration in a sense. But to kind of put that in context with death is a very like interesting contrast. So this piece is in the show. It's titled Rest in Paradise. And this is actually a series of airbrush t-shirts that are sewn into canvases. And they're treated as one surface. So the canvas represents the high art part, and the t-shirt is the low art. And by sewing those two together, it creates one surface. And so once again, like this idea of what is paradise, how do we think of paradise? It's very subjective. We all view like what is paradise differently, especially like thinking about afterlife. Especially you guys are on the West Coast too. You guys have this idea of this paradise. Being from the South and the East Coast, it's total opposite. So this is one of 4 in the series of Rest in Paradise. Here's a detailed shot of Rest in Paradise. Okay, so my next series of works is called the Basketball Bloom series, which began in 2010 by collecting basketballs from all over the country. At first, I didn't really know why, but I was very attracted to the object itself. So I'll just start by saying at first, I did not make these. It started with me just collecting the objects, because I realized that like most community centers, parks, and public spaces, people would just throw big rubber basketballs away. They would poke holes in them or let them like decay. They would sit in the mud. But I think when I gathered about maybe 6 or 7 of them, I decided to slice one open. I was curious about how does it bounce? What is it made of? What is at the core of a basketball? Very, very simple, basic questions. And then I began thinking about it carrying history, it carrying this like memory of touch. So by combining them with shoestrings, I formed these objects called basketball blooms. I thought about them as like just memories of people's touches and like charged artifacts once again. So they told a story through surface and texture. Here's another detailed shot of like the texture, the history of it. Some of them still have the mud from where it was located, so geography. So the blooms are bound together using shoestrings. The titles of the pieces, they come from the handwritings and the signage that I find on the basketballs. So by gathering the information from the object's memory, the objects name themselves. And I think, Lorraine, we had a conversation about that earlier, about just, the work speaks to us. So this piece is titled $1.59. There's a green sticker, see if I can do this right, up top. I bought that from a thrift store, and it had, $1.59. I thought that was just a pretty good title for a piece. Okay, so the structures of memorials, I find those compelling. The formal structure of them, how they're built, how they're arranged. and how they impact us through the principles of design. So from large to small, how they're categorized. This influenced a piece called The Starting Five. The Starting Five is a piece that commemorates the styles of Black hair culture and the influence of professional athletes in a way that relates to primitive African tribes. So this is actually from barbershops. These are swept up from barbershops, from Black barbershops. Yes, they are. So I use gloves because it's very, very nasty and it's full of dirt. You think about hair catches the dirt that we, come into involvement with. And I use glue to attach them to the basketballs to make these hairstyles. And it gives them their individual character. So once again, and it's a very natural looking object. So lastly, I have a series called the Foul Shot series. This series comes from found objects as well, but I'm using the found objects to make these goals. The goals are, the actual rims are made from trash cans, milk crates, and toilet seats. So this idea of elevating these objects that are usually, lower, especially a toilet seat. A toilet seat, of course, we know is lower, but what happens when you raise that? Formally, it becomes an oval that you can shoot things through. So I'm thinking about how these are also signifiers. They're just objects, and we give them the power, and they empower us through visual. So this is another foul shot made from bamboo and milk crates and shoestrings. And finally, I want to end by showing you the foul shot piece with the toilet seat. So it's a spray painted toilet seat, elevated to about 6 feet high. All right. Yeah, and I'll just end it there, and I'll let Jessica carry it on from here. Thank you so much.
Tough act to follow. Thanks everybody for coming. See some familiar faces from the demo this morning. I had a really good time showing Hannah's students some fabric printing. It's been great. I'm still a little bit on my East Coast mind, so forgive me if I'm a little loopy, but here we go. So I titled this talk Interdisciplinary Forms of Resistance, because it's really sometimes hard for me to kind of introduce myself as an artist. People are I say I'm an artist, and they say, what kind of art? And I'm like, well, I am. So working in a lot of different ways, and they usually will ask, what do you make art about? And to that I usually say something like, you have been educated and socialized into a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy with a long history of violence and colonization. You are a very tiny part of a machine, a complex and indifferent machine, which actively seeks to destroy that which it cannot exploit. How might you respond to your programming? And so the small talk is over. It's already gotten pretty intense. But what I want to say about that is that my practice kind of starts in printmaking. It'll expand into lots of different things, but the printmaking brings me to each thing. In printmaking, I'm drawn to the multiple, drawn to process and dissemination, to math, to design. I'm thinking about industry and ways that it connects to the tangible world. Print is around us, it's on us, it's everywhere. So in that way, it provides a lot of access to a lot of different media. It connects to my interest in textiles, in sculpture, performance, economics and relational aesthetics, storytelling and world building, programming, and mapping. I identify as a Black woman, and with that identity, sometimes I feel like I'm kind of the antithesis of a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Being aware of that and aware of those stereotypes and those challenges, it puts me in this position of opposition almost immediately as I walk out the door. So if I want to preserve my well-being, preserve my identity, that puts me directly in opposition with some of the values of our society. So in that reason, it feels very necessary for my practice to be interdisciplinary, because things like white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy are so ingrained in us that they're in every single thing. They're in our buildings, they're in everything that you can imagine. And it might seem very mundane, so I feel like I have to fight back at that by being just as interdisciplinary as the structures around me. So I'll share with you some ways that exist. This is an installation I did called Hear a Vibration. It includes print, video, projection, sound, and sculpture. In this, I'm confronting that programming, confronting this idea of what has been put on me and how I can kind of attempt to course correct and re-educate myself. I searched for different ways to overcome the programming, and in that search, I have begun to kind of theorize about how to become a fully cognizant, less susceptible person. So I equate the brain as a sapience and the gut as a sentience, and trying to make them both healthy and be in constant communication with each other. I think of the brain as a way of reasoning with the world, and the gut as a way of intuiting and feeling. And so if we live in a society that values reasoning over intuition, we're ignoring a major function of our bodies, of our intelligence, which is to perceive and feel things. And I've supposed in this installation that sort of neglect can kind of build up with messages not being answered between the brain and the gut. And with that overwhelm, that communication eventually just shuts off. So in the piece, I start by conflating that metaphor of trusting your gut with the actual research that gut health may affect your mental and physical health. It's kind of accepted by now that the bacteria that live in your intestine and your gastrointestinal tract, they play an important role, not only to the way that we digest food, but also to the way that your general disposition, your brain, it's all related. In conflating the two concepts and applying that to our overall structures, I'm building this narrative around a conspiracy or a phenomenon in which we betray our own selves by trying to uphold and maintain the values of our society. So the cheese puffs represent these the delicious, deceptive lies that we consume with the promise of this thrilling experience, but they betray us by giving us no nutrients, and they also clog up the communication from the gut to the brain. This is a video clip, and it is playing. It'll take a second. I do use humor because it's heavy, yeah. This video plays throughout the installation. I think of the video projection, it's as large as a wall, and I'm thinking about it more as like different paintings. I've kind of played with the language of how we elevate and de-elevate different media based on their histories. And with the way that things move kind of slowly, I'm trying to think about them as compositions more so than a video, straightforward film sort of narrative. And so I'm playing out, in the video, I'm playing out different parts of the way that I'm correcting my gut. These are all necessary steps in order to re-educate myself. There's also a lot of color theory. I just really enjoy vibrating colors, and this idea that with the blue and pink triangle, thinking of them as forming the unit, forming the pixel, and how is it that you can be in one pixel but also be split between that pixel, and kind of making those vibrations with that. You have to watch the whole one to get the satisfying part of that one. Okay, so I use pattern and color to distort the space. They're also a representation of time, this moment called hypervisibility, a moment that you're seen but also not seen. For someone who's never experienced hypervisibility, it's probably kind of a jarring experience, and kind of coming into this uncomfortable, where am I? There I am, okay, yeah. Kind of coming into this uncomfortable frequency of this space. But if you are familiar with this idea of being seen and unseen at the same time, it may provide kind of a space of comfort. If you can stand the vibration, then maybe you can be comforted by it around you. And so with these metaphors in place, kind of thinking about the physicality of my own anxiety, thinking about ways in which I've been deceived and the role that that deception plays in my sense of self, I sought to fix that relationship between my gut and my brain. And I use this sort of mapping as a way to navigate both the installation space and the narrative. It also becomes kind of a score for my broader practice. If ever I'm lost in the practice, I kind of can go to these points, and they mean something to me. That helps me understand, like, maybe I just need to dig into the receiving part more, and kind of explore different parts of the practice. But there is an unintended outcome. The beneficiary is what I call the person who acts out a lot of these things. The beneficiary disappears. In this, I'm pointing to my own fears and suspicions with the entire investigation. Would this sort of investigation take me to the same places of some of the people that I seek out when I'm trying to work through this remedy? And what becomes of a person whose gut and brain are effectively working together? Does that person no longer subscribe to the values of our society? Historically, in this country, revolutionaries have been assassinated, imprisoned, discredited, drugged, and or somehow otherwise relegated to the fringes of our society. And so it seems the narrative has this kind of dark ending, or like one way of ending. But I also kind of leave that open for myself to think, if you're being made invisible, is that an end, or is that just the beginning? If you can be invisible, how can you also move through space and affect just because you're invisible doesn't mean you aren't there. Whew. So that is very loaded work, but I'm gonna share some other things that kind of relate to that, and it kind of builds on some of these in different ways and kind of gets to some of the work that I included in this show. I'm not moving forward, am I? This is Nature's Intent. This is a collaboration that I do with another artist, Abigail Lucian. Nature's Intent is an illusory cosmetic company that specializes in hair care for an acceptably natural you. In this collaborative work, we consider the materials and presentation possibilities of the printed image. We also explore the personal histories and shared histories that we share as a cultural connection. We use the aesthetics of beauty advertising and reproductive possibilities of printmaking to investigate some of these Western beauty standards, cultural identity, and the history of media's representation of women of color. We have two products, Creamy Crack and Sissy's Serum. It's actually called Sissy's Curl Blocking, Sissy's Smooth Talking Curl Blocking Anti-Extra Serum, but we call it Sissy Serum for short. Each campaign kind of follows the same formula of print, installation, performance, and documentation. In the Dreamy Creamy Crack House, we hand printed 450 two-color screen prints and then cut those down and made those boxes. And we featured that at the 2015 Southern Graphics Council in Knoxville, Tennessee. And then when we moved, we learned a lot by hand cutting 450 boxes. We gathered lots of volunteers and spent lots of time awake. So by the time we got to our second product, we were like, let's figure this out and automate. So we were able to, for the second product, use a laser cutter to cut out our boxes. We ended up printing over 700 this time, two-color prints, but we got a little bit smarter with our design, and we were able to make them fit in our school's laser cutter so that we could move a lot faster. This is a time lapse of our installation at the 2016 Southern Graphics Council Conference in Portland, Oregon. I'm gonna let this play out because there's a nice little treat. The number one question we get when we install this is, or not question, the comment, I just wanna run through and knock it down. Don't say that to artists building something, like, that's just mean. It's like, I wanna run through and knock you down, how about that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's good. Yeah, they do fall down, but we just build it again. And this was the first time that we actually kind of let people interact while we were building it. We just built it live while people were coming through the conference. Usually we like to work in private so we can kind of like do our little jam session and like play around and stuff, but we opened ourselves up to conversation. This next series kind of builds off of Nature's Intent in a lot of ways. This is more of my personal work. This series is called She Would Become Lost. I am using silkscreen on paper and fabric, using the repetition as a way to mask information, and exploring ways that placing my body within a picture plane, disguising myself, or mimicking the background, like how and when do I disappear? In this one specifically, I've taken a commercially printed fabric and I've made kind of this sculptural garment. And for the background, I scanned the fabric, did some photoshopping to recreate the pattern, and then color match the ink with a silkscreen wallpaper. So trying to match it as much as possible, but also being really, really happy with parts that fail. Kind of comparing myself to a machine and seeing where those two meet up, where it's possible and where it's not possible. This is another iteration of the same concepts, but this time I have designed all of the wallpaper as well as the main fabric motifs, and then kind of incorporating some more found materials. I was seeing these mostly as explorations in surveillance, camouflage, and visibility. I was thinking about dazzle boats and Bridget Riley's op art and just the act of disappearing. Taking control of when and how I'm seen. Very much the same way we play around with nature's intent. And I felt like these were very much like a step in the right direction as far as what I was trying to do. I knew that one way to be invisible was to not be seen at all, but I wanted to explore this other way of being invisible by being overseen, much like the way we expose ourselves to traumatizing images over and over and over can make a violence seem ordinary. It can make black and brown bodies seem like they were made to be brutalized. So repeating something over and over until it falls into the background, how am I reacting to that? After all of this sort of work, I spent a summer in Saugatuck, Michigan, at a residency called Oxbow. With this, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of artists that I hadn't been exposed to, and while I was making some of the other work, while it was really fun and really generating for me, it was very hard to explain why I'm using cheese puffs to people who maybe didn't understand why I would go that route. But at Oxbow, I was just exposed to a broader way of working, and it really opened up some access to some different performative works, and then I could kind of formalize and do some more formal research about the way that I felt I was just intuitively working. There were also weekly costume parties, and so I took that as an opportunity to get back into some of my sewing roots. I began making this jumpsuit. I started designing a jumpsuit for myself, and every time I made one, somebody was like, but I want one, and I would just give them the one that I had made for myself. I was just kind of in search of this perfect uniform, this kind of thing I can throw on and keep going, but in that, I was opening myself up to this conversation where I was like, this meets more people's needs. This is maybe this is something bigger than me, and thinking about how it could be customized and utility and is kind of elegant in its simplicity. And at this point, it felt kind of weird to think about it as my work, but I was really drawn to the process of it, so I kept working with it materially and conceptually. And it kind of led me to this idea of what else in the world do we need that we can't conceive of because we've already just accepted what's in front of us. And I'm kind of activating that in my practice and trying to figure out ways that, while I can be really speculative and imaginative in some of the work, I can also do, real work in a space and see how that I can transform small things, such as this is a performance of exactly that idea. While I was at the residency, I developed what's called Trade Winds by Jack's Gecko. It was a trade post, And I just sat in the meadow for a full day, allowing people to kind of come down and trade objects. When you're at a residency, you're kind of isolated, and you may have brought like all your paintbrushes, but you forgot your turpentine or something like that, and you have something that you need, but you're in this isolated space. So I wanted to facilitate a way in which people could communicate and trade and kind of meet those needs without having to have Amazon Prime come in every couple of days. So I just stood there and kind of put on this uniform of Jack's Gecko. Jack's Gecko is another moniker I go by, with the initials JG. I really wanted to like play with that language of, sounds like he might be a car salesman, but, and I guess he's a he, suddenly, but, but like with very little preparation, I just kind of sat down with my spreadsheets that I love, and just went through and kind of like facilitated these transactions for people. I will say, this is the only documentation I keep of this. I wanted to keep it very open-ended and something that I could share this exact document with somebody, and they could then be Jack's Gecko, and they could then carry out the trade post. I think about it as a performance, but I don't think about it as something that you don't need to see the object. You don't need to I feel like that cheapens it a little bit by seeing like, oh, this is a picture of someone trading this object for that object. But it was really interesting to see like what people started to trade. Some things come back through a few times. Like somebody will trade something and decide they want something else for it. And it was totally up to me to kind of decide like how much something is worth. So I started asking people, well, what do you want for it? And I would record their want. So we, in the meadow, just have this big list of wants, and we have this big list of haves. You could trade a massage for a leather corset if the person agreed to it. And I was just there to kind of like say, like, do you agree? Do you agree? And they meet in the middle. This next project is a one-time performance I did at Seed Space Gallery in Nashville, Tennessee. I covered the space in brown paper. I covered the floor in soil and pennies. And I did a performance in which I'm also wearing brown and printing the word resist on shopping bags. Just silently ruminating on this idea that in a consumerist culture, even your resistance can then be commodified. This creates a weird conversation in which like I'm interested in making things and having people come in the space, and people are responding by wanting it, but also knowing that they're not supposed to want it, and that's like exactly where I am. Like it's hard to fight that idea of your desires and trying to do better at the same time. But in addition to the kind of more like direct work, I do still work on the speculative stuff. It really is healing for me. So it's stuff that I revisit. I did do another version of the Here vibration in which I started thinking about how I could give the cheese puffs a mother. Like where do they come from? And so this is like a styrofoam ball that I've then taken sequins and pins and recreated like a disco cheese puff kind of ball. And then to wrap up, I will just talk about the work that's in the show really briefly. I think it's gonna come up. So this is a video sketch that I put together for a luxury clothing brand that I'm creating. In a previous life, I worked as a production seamstress for a sustainable clothing brand. In that work, I often felt myself feeling exploited and on display, as it was a habit and marketing tool of the company to share everything on Instagram and on their blog. So I really started thinking about ways that I could continue to push that. Like, how far would it go if this idea of exploitation and whose labor is involved, like, how far could that go? And so I put together this really, like, quick video in which I'm thinking about, like, a commercial for the garments. The name of the brand is Worn by JG. I'm also really investigating the tendency, again, of art to be specified as high art, and painting and sculpture, and low art as craft and sewing. Each of the garments is made out of cotton canvas, same canvas that goes in a painting. Each of them is a sculptured object, and each of them has pigments attached to them. So I do call them paintings sometimes. Sometimes I call them sculptural paintings. And the materials that go into them are cotton canvas and labor. So yes, it's a clothing brand that takes sustainability to the next level. Sustainable clothing is often made from natural fibers using natural dyes, and they result in rigid, long-lasting, tough-wearing garments. But who has time to wear in clothing and get that nice distressed look? I do. All of the garments at Worn by JG are worn by JG using the most natural of dyes: blood, sweat, and tears. And this is my final image. This one's in the show as well. It's called Holding On to What We Got. And this one is really fresh for me. I haven't intellectualized it and made it all like super neat with a bow. But what I can say about it is I needed to see it. I really needed to see a watermelon flag. And that's where I started. And I was thinking about watermelon stereotypes, and also how enjoyable watermelon is, and how popular it was last year. It was like everywhere, every bar I went to had a watermelon drink. And I was like, so when did we decide that watermelon is like this thing that we can have now? And it's also like, it led me to some more investigation about that stereotype, and what that comes from is actually, it's a stereotype about Black people being lazy, but it is really something that in its device, it separates Black people from their independence, because Black people, watermelon was a way in which poor people, specifically Black people who had previously been enslaved while they were enslaved, they were able to make money by growing watermelon. It was a relatively easy crop. You didn't have to like really manage it, but in this way, now you get this image of people enjoying their watermelon, and that means that they're lazy and don't work hard. So I was really just trying to think about like what? Why would, like, the way that we get robbed of ourselves when we allow people to make a tool and take that away from us. So yeah, I just needed to see this watermelon kind of translated and elevated. But I was also really curious about conflating the colors of watermelon with the colors of the Pan-African flag, the red, black, and green, thinking about various forms of historical Black resistance, independence, and organization. The title of it is Holding On to What We Got. And strangely enough, like, as I'm making this piece, I'm singing Bon Jovi. Living on a Prayer, and I don't ask the, like, sometimes it feels like the work, like we were saying, like the titles come, from the work itself. And if that's like what I keep singing to myself as I'm making it, hold on to what we got, I really am, like, I felt safe in like letting myself give into that without thinking about it too much. Because I feel like holding on to what we got, it starts to speak through the piece the more I sit with it. And that's me, y'all. So Brandon is going to answer all your questions. I'm done here. You want your water?
There's a microphone here that if you want to, or you can project your voice, but.
I think for Zoom, they said it was easier.
Right, we'll record the answer and the question if you ask it into the microphone, so
Okay.
go for it.
They can also repeat the question.
True. Yeah, true. And if you answer your question into the microphone, this is good.
Hi, you guys are really cool. I was just wondering, since you're both such conceptual artists and you're both working in a lot of abstraction, do you ever worry about people misinterpreting or not understanding? Because we got the joy of all the context you gave us, but do you ever, how do you help other people to put your work into context and understand all the actual thought and work that you're putting into it?
I have a few. I think I'll start by saying that, like, yes, that I guess as an artist, I don't think that we can control the message in it and how it's received. I think our work is, can you guys hear the mic? Okay, all right. Yeah, I think, like the work is done when when it leaves our studio. And we can't control the message that it conveys to the audience after that. So I don't really worry about it as much. I hope for the best, but it's out of my hands.
My response is similar. Not my job in some ways, but also like hoping that people kind of pick up on some of the symbols that I'm putting out. Because sometimes I don't know exactly what it's about. Like I'm sometimes just a vessel for whatever is coming through. So yeah, we talk about that a lot. Like I'm not the genius. Like it's a lot that goes into it, and I think as a collective we can kind of decide what it means, both singularly and together.
Hey guys, that was a great presentation, the both of you. There was so much to think about and so much to feel that this question is inevitably going to sound stupid in light of it. But given that, I guess the first thing that really comes to my mind about both of your bodies of work is that I see this like tension between like satirizing and criticizing a type of extremely racialized capitalism, but then also reclaiming that and finding a way to turn it into something that is, compassionate, something that is beautiful, what have you. And the reason why I feel like there's a tension there is that we live in a really heightened and urgent time when it comes to the state of, extremely racialized capitalism. Like this is it feels like everything's about to fall apart. And so a lot of us are like really torn, especially in the political like activist community, but I think in like every other community too, between do we burn it all down or do we try to reclaim some of it for ourselves and rebuild better, right? And so that like line is really hard for me to draw personally, because sometimes being critical of something is a way of reclaiming it, or sometimes by reclaiming it, you are building something new that's different from what it was. And I just want to hear your thoughts on like how you navigate that distinction, especially in light of like what are your clear political commitments.
Thank you. That was a really good question. Do you want to go first or should? Okay. Oh, I think that's just the practice, is like literally just navigating. Like every piece is different in that way. I am, in like theory, a fan of the burn it down approach. I think fire is a healing tool, often.
Welcome to Northern California.
I was gonna say, I feel like maybe I'm saying that, and maybe I shouldn't. But I think, I guess, like as a person who belongs to a collective of oppressed people, it doesn't worry me as much as people who may have not been privy to the way the world is working in this kind of like heightened sense. Because for me, like in the vibration piece, it's like it's been there all along, and whether you've been tuned into it or not. And so we're all kind of tuning in a way that I think, like, even if it does explode, like, something new will be born out of that. And we might not all make it, but, you know.
The only thing that I have to add to that, I mean, I totally agree. It's just that I don't have a solution, like for myself. Like, I don't know if I think there is one single solution, but I think like the act of acting, like acting is a part of, I don't know, that maybe like acting is a part of the solution, but there is no solution. I don't know. That's a really thing. Yeah, but I think action is a part of it though. So that's all I have to add to it.
Was that helpful in some abstract way?
I could just ask a little bit about the word coding with a T, because that's like half the show's title.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we got a lot of exposure to coding with a D from your talks, and code switching as in taking work from the street and putting it in the gallery,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So I wonder if you could talk more about coding with a T, as in coats of paint to make something more formal, or to hide the roughness or the age of it, or as in sugar coating to make something bitter easier to swallow, or something painful easier to take in, and when that goes too far, as in it's so sweet that you can't stand it and it hurts your gut, you know.
I can talk about that in terms of airbrushing. I mean, I think about that a lot, about the coating of this bright, especially dealing with like the topic of death, and the brightness of it, and the celebration of like death, especially with massacres and homicide. So the question was, how do I think about coding?
Yeah, coding with a T, as in, but then when does it go too far? Like you're coding it so much that you no longer see it for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak on it in terms of like being an artist. This is something I've like developed to understand is when to stop. You know, when to stop. I think while in school and being younger, I didn't know when to stop. I just wanted to have fun and play formally with things, but understanding that like there is, I mean, you know when it's finished. You know, like you have this thing inside when you know. And a part of that process deals with the coding, I believe. Adding multiple layers. Some of the layers we won't even understand while making the work. I think you kind of alluded to that earlier, but yeah, let me think some more on that. I think that's
Yeah. I feel like that's a very chewy question. I mean, I guess I apply it pretty metaphorically, I guess, in a lot of my work. I am thinking about the layers of metaphors and the layering of adding humor in and coding things so that like you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, like that sort of thing, with Cheetos. Yeah. But ways in which I can, because I think like I think of myself as maybe like my first customer. Like I'm the closest to the work. Does it satisfy something in me a lot of times? And I can just hope that like it does for other people. But with the coding of that is like trusting that I know when to stop and how many symbols is too many symbols. And also like very honestly, sometimes I coat and code in a way that only a very specific select few people might even get what I'm getting at. And that's special to me. That's like a way that I can communicate and be like, oh, I see you back there. We watch that same one TV show that nobody else watches. But yeah. Miss Lorraine Bonner.
Thank you both. Boy, both of you guys are just really so thrilling. I really love the stuff you talked in the beginning about the brain and the gut, and of course, you know, all the bacteria that live in the gut that are part of our ecosystem, and that we, in the past, have just so thoughtlessly destroyed, you know, and now it's like, whoa, that was not a good idea. And it also sort of reverberated for me again when you were talking about how can you know what you need if you've never seen it before, you know, or at least in our iteration of human lifetime. I assume that in the past, we really knew.
Yeah.
We really knew.
Yeah.
And something happened that messed it up. So I'd like to hear you talk a little more about that connection.
Yeah.
The brain-gut connection, and how we can find out what it is that we don't know that we know.
Whew. I guess let me start by saying I'm a Cancer. It's a moon. I'm ruled by the moon, so I'm kind of like naturally ruled by my emotions and my feelings. And I grew up thinking that wasn't okay, thinking it wasn't okay to cry, thinking you have to like be like stern and like not show a lot of emotion. And what I'm learning about myself currently is that like sometimes my emotions and my body are sometimes smarter than my brain. Like I think about like the way as an artist you use your hands, like. And this morning, like when I was trying to like explain an action that I had just done, but I was like I couldn't get the communication in words because my hands know it, my mouth doesn't, my brain hasn't had to form it yet. So I think about just ways of giving into things that like aren't necessary to intellectualize, and thinking about what even intellect is. Like I really had kind of a weird kind of spiraling of understanding that everything around us is built and made by a person and that person made decisions, and some of those decisions were in order to cut other people out of that thing. And so I look at everything with that lens, and if I look at everything with that lens and realize I'm also a person who can make things and make decisions based on my own intellect, then I can also decide which parts of my intellect to use. And I've never said that out loud, so I don't even know if those are words. Those are words. Yeah. Did you get that?
Well, speaking of the intellect and structure versus intuition, I guess the hour is technically kind of coming to a close. So to wrap it up, really amazing to hear from you guys. Just the depth of your thinking and seeing your work up and all of it together is just really incredible. So I want to give many thanks for you guys flying out here, getting on an airplane, coming here, and helping us all understand better and see your beautiful work and help the show happen. So thank you all for coming, and I encourage you please to go check out the show, like 30 feet away. And the reception is tonight from 4 to 6. So please come on down, And thank you guys very, very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
If you had a question and you were shy, just catch us at the reception.
Emotional, opened up.
Hey, good job, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's
for your help.
really cool work. It's like I'm a multidisciplinary designer and artist as well.
Sweet.
So I like dig all that stuff. I do like I'm an audio engineer. I visual art. I do graphic art. I make tons of stuff out of found materials. That's one of my things I like to do a lot too. Which I was like, that's rad.
Yeah.
The football or the basketball things. They're so nice and they're really pretty.
Yeah, we're out here, like the multi-working.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I'm originally from outside of Philly.
Yeah,
So.
nice. I lived in Philly for like 4 years.
Okay, yeah.
Love Philly.
And Nashville, I've heard, is a pretty awesome city for art and music,
It's
right?
popping right now, yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of people moving down there.
Cool. All right,
Yeah.
that's great.